Hmm. I guess disclaimer where I would like to think of my videos for the most part to be tangents, which effectively are reduced down to speaking freely as opposed to just merely freedom of speech. I I've been giving a lot of thought to this one. Well, not a lot, but intense as much more than time wise. But it's how I draw from external sources that I attempt to then um, confound into self defined internal inspiration. Um, hmm. So, on my quest to dismember or disbar the crown, the royal family of England in the real sense, which in my own personal, I don't care what the uh, popular interpretation of this idea is, um, or the acceptance or critiques of the scholarly, wealthy, popular, or whatever you want to call it, individuals amount to the ability to speak freely is not dependent on the permissibility or the preponderance of the quote unquote freedom of speech. Um, it is, in a sense, contrarily, make that up, um, derived from, first and foremost, the freedom of thought. That is far greater a challenge to endeavor or pursue um, than merely the juvenilistic or even infantile note. Well, infantile is we'll get was what I want to get into a notion of saying what you want to say. um, what you want to say is only based on, well, what you want to say tends to be based on primarily how you feel. An example being a child that is raised on chemically enhanced or chemically disguised food like McDonald's or sodas, colas, whatever you want to call them, high fructose corn syrup, salt, like French fries that are Ritalin, Adderall, and other stuff like that that are effectively not mind so much as mind altering substances as much as mental manipulating in the sense that to distort in my own fashion the ideology or teachings of Bruce Lee in which he discusses for the sense of combat the ability to create tension, like as if when you're intending to attack your opponent, the idea behind what you're doing is to maintain a state of tension so as to reverse or delay or detach your opponent's ability to coherently react, whether it be instinctually or intentionally. Um, and the higher level of tension or dominating you can impose upon your opponent, the greater ability of control you have in the endeavor. Whew. All right. So, on that note, tangent again. Um, to try to draw from a familiar, as far as my community is concerned, um, notion or phrase, I don't know if there's a difference, um, from the mouth of babes. So, freedom of thought is not so confined. I have no affinity um, or reverence for the notion, which I consider the notion of Jesus, um, as anything. But freedom of thought allows one to crazily create relevance anywhere from whatever source one chooses to. Where the contrary to that is somewhat intellect, in which one ability to draw conclusions are regulated to the confines of the of the or a readily available foundation, source code, so to speak. Um, so that would be uh, something along the lines of somebody that self-identifies as a Christian can find little or no or even contrary positive or constructive ideas in something that they're taught to identify as generically non-Christian, or you can even get specifically such as Buddhist or Islamic. It's a weird mesh with Judaism. Um, but the notion being one, the Islamic sentiment being that there's degrees on it too. The connotation, I don't know if that's the right word, towards Islamic would be they do not identify Jesus in its proper place. The Buddhists, or even getting into Hinduism, would be the polytheistic, theistic, theistic um, construct. But on the lowest of the levels would be getting into something like Buddhism, which don't identify the existence of a god, and then but still have a religious order, and then even lower below that you get into just raw what's considered atheist. But anyways, from the mouth of babes to deal with Christianity. Um, from the mouth of babes. So to delve into that idea that's purportedly proposed by the central figure of all Christianity, that being the character of Jesus. This character identifies a source of truth as from the mouth of babes. So when you can identify the source of truth, you have a greater opportunity, perhaps theoretically, of identifying the truth. The idea that the source of truth is a babe tends to be interpreted by Christianity to mean maintain a simple mind. That seems to be what's purported by the clerical order that pervades Christianity, actually. Anyway, just deal with Christianity. Um, Meaning, in one sense, it tends to be self-interpreted without being, in some cases, fully outrightly asserted, but in most cases, just subversively suggested. Uh, don't question whoever your clergy is, your teacher, shepherd, or whatnot. They act essentially as your greater conscience, or as your soul conscious. Um, but I would actually twist that, obviously, um, in an effort to apply man's knowledge, I guess, or no knowledge whatsoever, to say from the mouth of babes. Identifying the babe then becomes, in one sense, connected with one's ability to identify the truth. Um, if you, we, we apply the term babes solely on a demographical scale of age, then one is merely reduced to being concerned about the goos and the gahs of incoherent, nonsensical, primitive mind. Um, to just go completely further off the wall, as I hope I do, you could likewise, to Christians are now attempting to merge Christianity and, well, all modern religions now are attempting to merge the role of science with themselves, as in, oh, they found the ark, or oh, they found the shroud, or oh, the Bible says this about some kind of thing, and it can be applied. Modern science proves this, or archaeological evidence likewise um, collaborates it, corroborates it, such as every religion does it. Um, Buddhism does it with the lotus flower and psychological phenomena or diagnoses. Islam does it with celestial events. Judaism does it because Christianity is derived and Islam is derived primarily from what's known today as modern Judaism. Um, but to apply that type of logic to from the mouth of babes uh, on a scientific or psychological scale, babes or infants, if I'm not stretching it too far, is not merely a chronological identification, but likewise a developmental, or even possibly primarily a, maybe secondary, that's fine, developmental identification. And we all know this, as in we all know an adult whether it be male or female, whether it be young adult, middle-aged adult, or elderly, who, or we call it a midlife crisis, so to speak, who, or whatever, doesn't get it, or is stuck in their ways, or is trying too hard, or doesn't know how to grow up, the Peter Pan syndrome, or the Cinderella, the counterpart of the Peter Pan in the male, and that's not to say that the female cannot be Peter Pan too. That's a very dualistic, simplistic, and infantile um, system of designating human life in general, thinking process. There's the Peter Pan syndrome, and then there's likewise the Cinderella complex, which is actually a legitimate psychological diagnosis that exists today. That I think both of them are, to be honest with you. So that's childish in that sense, but there's also the infantile, and so that means that you can have a fully developed, physically fully developed human brain in a in a body that's reached various levels of maturity that still operates on a arguably infantile psychology. Um, it's very difficult to accept this, but because of the implications. But some experts, particularly Dr. Gabor Mate, who I happen to be a fan of, he would assert that most drug addicts, he runs the only legal safe injection drug, illicit drug site in all of North America, and that's in Canada, Vancouver, Canada, against the force of the United States government and the Canadian government and greater Western forces that don't appreciate that type of activity and therefore exert public funds and in national state sanctioned authority to try to prevent such endeavors. But he's been successful. Not to the point where he can that type of project can be expanded, but just sustained at the level it is. But he would state, and I'm sure there's others that would agree with him, but it's probably a minority potentially, that would assert that for the most part, the drug addict's mind is stuck in an infantile state of psychology. And they're substituting, in one real sense, and this is I know most people won't agree with this, that's fine, that the language is too raw, but essentially they're substituting the narcotic of choice or the behavior of the drawn to the narcotic of choice as the breastfeeding experience, where they console themselves, where they're consoled and draw their sense of identity, which is the effect of breastfeeding an infant. And they can be at any age. And you can progress and regress. Or arguably. As such, from the mouth of babes, there's an interesting dynamic of legal language. There's a term called tutelage, or it's been referred to prior as pupillage, in which the law designates a legal person or a legalized person to be in this particular state of basically an infantile state in which they don't have the legal capacity to actively assert or because every human entity has at least one piece of property. That's their body. But if you're legally defined as under pupillage or tutelage, then that's equating your legal person as being essentially infantile, so much so that you're too vulnerable, or naive or incompetent, which is saying a lot about the perception of children, to live a contributive or aware, um, civilized life. This designation was the designation that the United States government most commonly used toward when dealing with what's called Native American tribes, Indians. So when what they did is how this works on a legal dynamic is that the American government would essentially, or European, actually, the English government uh, set out upon, and French and Spanish, set out upon the process of introducing the activity of signing treaties with Indian tribes so as to cohabitate. Well, the aftermath of this was that the later in later dates, the as the governments became more and more established and sovereignty was exerted by the Western civilization, the argument then became that as a result of the Indian tribes individually signing the treaties, they were like the Cherokees are a perfect example. They did their best to assimilate. They actually assimilated completely to Western civilization for the most part, thinking that that was like a child. If I act like them, I'll be accepted. I mean, it's proven the point in one real sense that where their state of mind was. But as a result of that, the the effect was not that the greater part of society or the government in which the government, the representative government in which they had these agreements with, in turn recognized them as saying, okay, well, you guys therefore have some sort of status that's equal or on par with us. But the government, like John Marshall was a Supreme Court when he made the decision on, you have to look it up on your own. I'm not going to get into it. Made a decision on the state of the Cherokees when they sued Georgia, the state of Georgia, who was usurping their land, robbing them blind, like the way the Nazis robbed the Jews. What the John Marshall said was that Indians by signing Cherokees by signing treaties with the American government, even though they were under the impression, or because they were under the impression that the treaties equalized their status with that of the American government, they were in fact demonstrating that they did not have the legal faculty to recognize the nature of contractual obligations, and therefore they fell from their rights, fall from their rights of individual or independence or sovereignty, and thus subjected themselves to the full purview of whatever the current United States government saw fit for them. And that equated in the Cherokees thing in some massive march that 4,000 of them died on because of deplorable conditions. And then further, just like the Nez Perce, same thing. You can read in Chief Joseph's own words, which is an amazing little speech. It's not too long. But from the mouths of babes. Um, I'd also like to point out that if it's from a Christian standpoint, from the mouths of babes, there's some type of truth to be heard, then I think it very relevant that white Christians created the designation and the practice of referring to black people, black Africans in America or in general, particularly, or European, because they did this in it's England. Again, it has to do with England, but we're most familiar with America. The Southern people, actually all over, refer to black people and still today as boy in a childish state. And so you find that I would assert that the uh, pleas or the cries or the arguments or the rationale or the reasoning or the pleading or interpretation or assessment of the so identified tutelage or pupillage or babes, um, in that they don't have a grasp of the legal uh, apparatus, which is a structure, different components that come together to make like you play on the playground apparatus. It's not just one thing; you have multiple things to play with. Um, that, in one sense, if there's a, I can identify a truth in the words of the character of Jesus, the implied words of the character of Jesus, that from the mouths of babes there's some kind of truth. That would be another way of saying that is from the mouths of savages. And what you find is that the argument that stands most pivotal today is the moving forward in the span of the human species as a whole. You have the primitives, the savages, the babes, as so identified by the dominating class, which is the greater minority. You have the primitive and babe class stating that we're emphatically on a pivotal point that threatens the well-being of maybe, well, as much as ourselves today, but on a greater compounding, escalating level, future generations, which are children. And they're generally tend to think along the lines of 7 generations ahead. Well, on the flip side of that, you have the modern adult, legally aware, capitalist, business savvy mentality saying, we've got to get what we can while we can. And so I put in the hands of Christians at the end of this tangent. Um, could you identify the truth if it was standing right in front of you?